Why don't we start with something else people should be watching? Roma by Alfonso Cuarón. I need to take more Spanish to be able to say that.
Quaron. It's not that hard, dog. Come
Nah,
on.
it's hard to
Qua.
me. Um, but I mean, everybody knows him. Anyone that's tuned into movies, I would say, knows him. He made Gravity. He also directed Children of Men, Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban, as well as some other films that are not as well known. But this is a film that is going to be garnering a lot of attention as an Oscar contender for the Best Picture. Um, and it's already won the Venice Film Festival and many other festivals. It's either won or been runner up or third place for the major awards. The interesting thing about this film is I watched this on Netflix. It was released on Netflix on December 14th. I'm going to start with this question. We'll kind of go from there. Is this a film that you think should win Best Picture?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of been the talk for most of the time now, is that it's either the Best Picture front runner or at least in like the top three. I would say it's between Roma, A Star Is Born, and probably The Favorite. I would say are the three with any real chance to win. I don't think Green Book could sneak in there, and that's the only one I think had a realistic chance recently. So it's those big three. And I'm thinking about it because I think what Roma what Roma winning means versus what A Star Is Born winning means are two very different things. And I'm still not quite sold on where I stand with that. But in terms of pure movie making, pure film criticism, I think Roma's a better film for sure. So I guess if that's all we're basing off of, then yeah, I think it should win. But the interesting thing to me is just the delivery method, right? You watched on Netflix. I also watched on Netflix. I was not planning to. I wanted to see in the theater. I was lucky enough to have it playing by me recently. And that's kind of the clout that Cuarón brings to this movie, is even though it's a Netflix film, he's able to get it in like 200 theaters in the US and like 600 overseas, and giving people the opportunity to see it the way he intended, if they so choose. And I think the thing that sat with me is I definitely didn't have like the best sound watching it at home. And it was probably one of the first times I'm like, man, I wish I had a bigger TV. I wish I had a better TV. I usually don't feel that way about television, but and I watch so many movies in the theater that's usually not an issue, right? But in the case of Roma, I was like, damn, I feel like I'm neglecting the experience. I mean, I still turn off my phone. I still watch it all the way through. It's a long movie, but I still felt like I was not quite getting the best experience.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I watched it. I put my phone down, put it on airplane mode, but the knock, I think that there's been several critiques of this film that I think are fair, but the one that I think is probably the most widely made is that it's a little slow at parts, and for having some really amazing bigger scenes, set designs and just beautifully shot moments, there's a lot of monotony and a lot of just feeling like, okay, I'm actually watching this maid Cleo and everyday life and kind of what she goes through. I mean, even the opening credit scene, it's kind of slow and it sets the pace of the movie, which is great. But I found myself going back to my phone, and I actually found myself being like, I wish I did see this in the theater, because I wouldn't be checking my phone. It'd be in my pocket right now. Like, I would just feel like I don't want to be looking at it, and I would have that social expectation of not to be checking my phone. You mentioned that you feel like this is a better movie than A Star Is Born, or at least a better concept. Would you say? I don't know, if because I guess it's all subjective. But what do you think makes this above A Star Is Born for you?
Yeah. I think Roma is just like a superior piece of filmmaking. I think it's incredibly masterful throughout, and it's so in your face. It's like hard to deny. I mean, Cuarón actually shot the movie himself. Like, he did the cinematography, he was behind the camera. He even did some of the sound mix because of the way schedules worked out. Like, he used to work with Emmanuel Lubezki a lot, but he couldn't get him to schedules to match up for Roma. So he did it himself for something he had never done before. And obviously, it's very uncommon in general.
Mhm.
And despite the fact that he was newer to those other aspects of filmmaking, it still came out so great. And I think, I mean, one thing like the black and white monochrome color palette of the film obviously is very striking, stands out right away. But you get used to it. And I
Mhm.
think it actually kind of fit the story. But the cinematography, speaking of like just the way his camera moved, whether it would like pan across the street as they were walking on the sidewalk, or be like maybe longer shots where there's like the paramilitary's training with the staffs, right?
Mhm.
Um, or even more like establishing shots of Mexico City. I think the camera's fantastic, and like you mentioned, the movie's very deliberate, very committed to the story it's telling, and that takes a lot of attention in terms of not just rushing the story. And I think the plots kind of serve, like you said, in the monotony and kind of the message of the film, which I would say just love, family, things like that, uh, is served through, mundane things like cleaning up dog shit
Mhm.
and young kids being obnoxious, right? And I
Kids are
just
the
couldn't,
worst, man.
I couldn't help but just marvel at just the whole enterprise. And I also found myself really enraptured just by the both the visual stylings, but also just the tenderness of the story, which again is more about the granular aspect of what goes into love than any kind of like broad sweeping gesture. So in a sense, it's almost like the anti-Star is Born, which is much more crowd pleasing and in your face and still awesome and very entertaining, but they're so different.
Mhm.
I just think a movie like Roma is just really impressive and unlike anything else I saw this year. But what did you think in regards to, like you mentioned, it's a little slow and you felt you were maybe more distracted than I was, and what was holding you back from maybe investing more in the movie?
Yeah, it's interesting because I felt like the scenes where it really gripped me. I was totally in. This it took me on a roller coaster ride of emotions. But I think when you get down to that monotony, um, it works to kind of establish the point that this is a small story about this servant maid for this family going through a very difficult time in her life and trying to understand the pain that she's going through while all these other things are happening around her. And I think that's probably what I appreciate most about this film is it really creates a world that is very realistic. And while she's walking to the movie theater, there's so much liveliness and life going on in the world around them. And like the shots in the movie theater where there's so many different things going on, whether it's like the nod to Gravity by Marooned, or it's like seeing people making out or seeing people getting up and going to the bathroom. Like it feels very capturing. But those down times really just, it felt like it was very fast paced and really gripping, and then very just lost me when it slowed down. Um, I do think as a piece of art, this is a great achievement. As a movie, it's obviously fantastic, and it's hard to really like these critiques are things that if I brought these to other movies, I would be basically saying every other movie is shit. Like this is just a really well made movie. Um, but I think in terms of like A Star Is Born or those other movies that I might consider like top tier, I think it comes down to preference. Like, what do you look for from movies?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, do you want the art house film or do you want to see Scorsese, like with like the musical drops and things like that? And if you can appreciate both and respect both, but I think I recently have been leaning more towards the latter in that.
Yeah, and I was reading some critiques on the film, and I know Richard Brody, pretty well known for the New Yorker, he was actually pretty critical in terms of how Roma treats Cleo, obviously the protagonist played by Yalitza Aparicio, her first role. And I thought she was very good in terms of
Yeah.
playing a subdued,
Subtle
uh,
role.
angelic character that also happens to be going through a lot and, you know, really having a tough time generally,
Mhm.
right? But his critique was that because she's so soft spoken and frankly does not speak a lot in this film, she's almost like not really served by the story. She's almost more of a cipher in terms of like the angelic working poor person, which is a bit of a trope.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because this film was made, it's very autobiographical about Cuarón's experience. I mean, obviously, it's taking place in 1970, 1971, Mexico City. We see the Corpus Christi massacre
Hmm.
up close in the film. And Cuarón was 10 at the time when that came out. The two movies we see in the film, Marooned and then that French war movie, were both movies that were foundational to Cuarón growing up. And the whole relationship of being in, like a upper middle class living in the Roma neighborhood, Mexico City, was Cuarón's experience. And he had a live in housekeeper like Cleo. And that's what the movie was dedicated to. But it almost seemed like it was really just Cuarón's perspective. And I don't know, like maybe the perspective of the youngest kid in the movie who was probably like the stand-in for Cuarón in real life, right?
Hmm.
So like I understand that, and I guess that makes sense. And like we can even think about it when we see the paramilitaries, right? With Fermin and all of them, right? Then we see
Hmm.
Zovek, that dude who does like the pose, right? Who's like I was a real person who was like linked to like training the right wing fighters,
Hmm.
but was never proven really. And then Cuarón just has him in there anyway as like fact, but it's fine. Um, but just like there's no real comment on the politics. There's no real comment on her having a child out of wedlock, right? We don't know
Hmm.
her stance on this really. We don't know the norms of abort. Nothing's really said, right?
Right.
And I think that's just kind of anywhere we could have put Cleo in the story. We never really get her side or her take. We just kind of see what happens. And I think that's a deliberate choice. And it
Hmm.
wasn't a problem for me, but I can understand that observation. I think it does make some sense. But it wasn't a problem for me.
Yeah, it's I think so. In an interview that he did, I forgot with who, Quaron talked about how this is supposed to be shot kind of like a memory in a way, and how these are supposed to just be like you're looking back at these things in your mind and you're seeing them just at the way that they were, not necessarily um, accurate or inaccurate, just whatever that was. Um, and I think that comes across really well, especially like the her Cleo racing to the ocean to and near the end to try to save the two children that were being swept away to the sea. Um, that scene like walking to the movies or the way that they shoot the massacre. Like all those different scenes are done really well, and I think I appreciate him not making the comment on these different things and not putting a political spin on it because I think he wanted to keep it really down to this experience and how, in a way it's a juxtaposition against the mom who is also going through this incredibly difficult time in her life and how Cleo handles it and how the mother handles it. And I think if you started to bring the political aspects in or making commentary on these different things, it makes a story about something it's not, which is it's about family. It's about what does it mean to be part of a family? Where do you find meaning within all these moments of pain and loss and fear? And I think Quaron, I give him credit for not doing that because it could have easily tried to say something that didn't need to be said to tell a story this beautifully. Um, you mentioned that Quran uh, was a cinematographer for this, which doesn't usually happen if you're writing, directing, producing. Um, what what scenes like stood out to you in terms of like shots? Because I think there was a lot in this movie that was really just like striking, cinematography wise.
Yeah, good question. I think definitely the shot at the training ground where Cleo's doing the pose
Hmm.
stood out to me. Like I said before, that shot of the camera panning parallel with Cleo walking down the sidewalk, I really liked. Um, let's see, there was the movie theater shot you mentioned before. Thought was really cool. That was an interesting angle. Um, the beach scene. Um, I mean, there's so many like close-up scenes too, like maybe like the car in the tunnel
Yeah.
at the end of the movie. I mean, and I think just in general, like the cinematography. I mean, it's shot on 65 millimeter film and looks like 70 millimeter when you actually see it.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, in general, the movie just looks better than other things because it was shot in a certain way. But did anything else stand out to you?
Yeah, this the whole time that they were on vacation for New Year's Eve, really, there was a lot. I thought of beauty there. Not only when they expanded it out into like the wildfire and all the stuff going on there, and like showing the landscape of where they are in beforehand, but then also when they bring it down to like the servants' party, like down below, and how like that felt like such like a little bodega like place, but then they bring it back to like the dancing of like the main family party. And
Yep.
I just thought that whole like sequence was really, really fantastic. It's a great film, and I think it rightfully is it going to be in the discussion for Best Picture. If this wins Best Picture, how do you see this affecting the landscape of how movies are? I don't know, like of just movies in general. If a Netflix product is now winning Best Picture.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing is the movie is on Netflix. In theory, the majority of people would see it on Netflix. However, because Netflix doesn't release its ratings, it's tough to gauge how many people have watched it since the 14th. We can look at the box office numbers and seen, relative to how many theaters in, it's done pretty well in terms of just straight box office here in the States. And again, it was in some other theaters. I know like the theaters it was in Mexico were selling out all the time. So it's funny. It's almost like the awareness of the film has driven people to the theater. And then it's hard for us to know if people just know it's on Netflix, know anything about it. It's really unknown. Um, and I kind of struggled on like, I kind of wish this could have just got a 2000 theater run in the States. On the other hand, the fact that this is going to reach, in theory, way more people than it ever would have because of being on Netflix right away, and getting an actual marketing push from Netflix because they're invested in the movie because they have distribution. Um, that's probably actually better. But in terms of it being a Netflix film and winning, it's funny because it's hard to like. I don't really like think of it as like a Netflix film. It's just a movie Netflix bought to put on their platform. It's like
Mhm.
Netflix didn't produce this; they just bought distribution rights. Quaron had this produced,
Right.
and basically, and then Netflix helped market it after they got involved. Um, Now, it would say something about the Academy voters voting for something. I mean, there has been a stigma about Netflix. Remember, just last year, they were refusing to put movies in runs, and they were disqualifying themselves from like Cannes and other music film festivals, right?
Mhm.
So they've already evolved a little bit in that regard. But in terms of what it says, I don't know because you could almost see Netflix like reversing back if they get this win because it would just kind of like they could just pat themselves on the back and know that they can't really do any wrong. So
Mhm.
I can really see it going either way. It's tough to say.
Yeah, I really agree with you. It's tough to say, and it's interesting because I think the Irishman is supposed to be coming out next year.
Yep.
I think,
Yep.
and I could see that being another film that potentially could gain some awards buzz if Scorsese is able to uh, give us a film that's his typical Scorsese greatness. Um, and that will continue to propel the conversation, and that will be a movie that is created and produced and funded by Netflix. So I think that will be the one that really will tell us like what direction this is gonna go in. And if this is gonna be Netflix's new big thing is like they want to be in these awards discussions all the time, or if just having these, you know, uh, these films that are made by the artists and they are just like, okay, put it on our platform. Here's a shitload of money just so that people are driving there. It'll be
Yep.
interesting, you know. Gonna be interesting. I also think, I was listening to The Big Picture with Sean Fennessy and Amanda Dobbins. One thing that they brought up that I thought was really interesting. They talk about A Star Is Born and how it had a chance to potentially take the major categories at the Oscars. I think uh, I think Best Director is definitely going to go to Coron.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He's like a ridiculous betting favorite right now.
Yeah.
And he should be. He's again,
Mhm.
we just talked about it. It was the best piece of directing. And he's going up against a good year. He's going up against uh, Bradley Cooper, debut role,
Yorgos.
Yorgos Lanthimos, who definitely has his own style, Barry Jenkins, Damien Chazelle.
Mhm.
Uh, it's impressive competition, but and
Definitely.
Mike Lee as well, who could get
Mhm.
steam for lifetime achievement stuff. But yeah, I think Cuarón should win. It's funny because he won before. He won for Gravity, and if when I'm gonna say when he wins,
Mhm.
5 of the last 6 best directors will have gone to Mexican men. And it's funny because when Cuarón won, he was the first Latino person, period, to win Best Director.
Yep.
And since he'll have won a second time, Inarritu won twice, and of course Del Toro won last year. The only one to get in on that, breaking that up, was Chazelle for La La Land. So yeah, I expect that to be Cuarón's. It's his to lose right now.
Mhm. Um, I don't know if I have much more to say about this. Do you?
No, I just I
Just go
really
watch
hope
it.
people watch it. And again, it's not like the most social movie. It's long, it's in Spanish subtitles, it's black and white, so it's like it's not every you can't do this for every hang. So you really have to commit to this movie.
Yeah.
But if you can't go to the theater, don't want to go to the theater, that's okay. Just turn the phone off and commit to it, because I really think it's more worth the viewing experience to commit to the movie that way.